Imagine building a billion-dollar empire from the ground up, only to have the person you trust most sell you out to your greatest enemy. That's exactly what happened to me. My wife wasn't just cheating. She was handing over my company's secrets to my biggest competitor. They thought they had it all figured out. They thought I wouldn't fight back. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. This is the story of how I lost everything and took it all back. Every morning began the same way, 5 a.m., no alarm needed. Years of habit had ingrained the rhythm into my body. As soon as I opened my eyes, my hand reached for the phone, unlocking it without conscious effort. A message waited on the screen. She missed me. She couldn't wait to see me tonight. A familiar warmth settled in my chest as I read it. 11 years together, and still Lena had the ability to make me pause, to remind me why we built this life. I responded quickly, the words automatic, before heading into the shower. Warm water rushed over my skin, steam rising as I let my mind wander. Work had consumed me lately. Tonight I would make an effort. A dinner reservation at Vincenzo's, the cozy Italian restaurant she loved, seemed like the right step. She deserved the attention. The day moved at a relentless pace, a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and technical briefings. Nova Dynamics was close to unveiling a revolutionary neural processing chip, one that would solidify our position at the forefront of the industry. The pressure was constant, but it was a weight I had learned to carry. By the time I checked the clock, the sun was already dipping below the skyline, casting long shadows over the glass walls of my office. Driving home, my thoughts drifted to the evening ahead. Lately, discussions of the future had surfaced more frequently. The idea of starting a family had remained just that, an idea. Maybe tonight, over candlelight and good wine, we would finally decide. As I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. Lena's car was already there. Thursdays were her late nights at the firm. This was unusual. Inside, the house was silent, except for a faint murmur coming from the study. A laugh, soft but unmistakably familiar. A voice warmed by affection, threaded with anticipation. I stopped near the door, breath slowing. Her words drifted through the gap, light, unguarded. She wasn't expecting me. She couldn't wait to see him. They had the whole night. Something inside me hollowed out, leaving only the dull pulse of disbelief. My fingers pressed against the wood of the doorframe, unwilling to push forward, desperate for an explanation that might shift the reality settling around me like iron. Then, the tone of her voice shifted, dipping into something more intimate. She had something special planned. A dress he loved. The meaning sat heavy in the air, undeniable. The door opened before I had time to reconsider. Lena turned, her phone still in hand. Her eyes widened, breath catching. The color drained from her face, and for a split second, I saw the guilt before she masked it. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. The truth had already filled the room. She hesitated, then straightened, arms crossing over her chest. The guilt was gone, replaced by something closer to resignation. She was meeting someone who noticed her. The words hit harder than I expected. 11 years reduced to this. I exhaled, grounding myself. Instead of telling me she had chosen to act, her expression remained indifferent. I had chosen my work over her. People changed. She had changed. For a moment, I searched for something, any sign of the woman I had built a life with. But all I saw was a stranger wearing her face. I asked the question, though I already knew the answer. Her lips curved into something sharp, almost amused. Someone who understood ambition. Someone unafraid of success. The name was obvious before she confirmed it. Nolan Carter, CEO of Neurocore Technologies. My competitor. The man whose company had been circling Nova Dynamics like a predator waiting for a moment of weakness. No more words were necessary. The silence stretched between us, an unspoken conclusion forming. She moved first, stepping past me without hesitation. A faint trace of perfume lingered in the air, one I had bought for her last anniversary. Now it turned my stomach. At the door, she paused. The divorce would be straightforward. She wanted half, and then she was gone. The house, once warm, felt empty. Not just quiet, absent, as if something vital had been stripped away. I stood there, motionless, the weight of what had just unfolded settling over me in thick layers. Minutes passed before I moved. The walls felt too close, the air too thin. I stepped outside without thinking, letting my feet carry me without direction. Eventually, I found myself at the park where we had our first date. The memory felt distant, belonging to another lifetime. I sank onto a bench, staring at the dim glow of streetlights flickering in the distance. Had I truly been so blind? So consumed by the demands of my company that I had driven her away? No, she had made a choice. She could have spoken to me, could have told me what she felt. Instead, she had betrayed me, aligning herself not just with another man, but with someone who had been actively working to undermine everything I built. This wasn't just personal. A slow, steady resolve took root. I reached for my phone, dialing a number without hesitation. The line picked up on the first ring. A voice greeted me, calm, expectant. I didn't waste time. I needed information. Everything. Names, dates, meetings. And most importantly, whether this was more than just an affair. The response was immediate. It would be handled. Discreetly. I ended the call, lowering the phone slowly. Lena thought she was walking away with half of everything. She had no idea what was coming. Sleep never came that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the words replayed in my mind, each syllable cutting deeper. I had spent years believing in a life that no longer existed. The house felt different now, silent, stripped of meaning. By dawn, the shock had burned away, leaving only a sharp, unwavering focus. The betrayal itself was one thing, but Nolan Carter's involvement made it something else entirely. It was no longer just personal. It was calculated. I spent the morning at the office, moving through the motions with mechanical precision. Meetings blurred together, numbers flashed across my screen, but my mind stayed locked on a single objective: answers. By midday, my phone vibrated. The number was unlisted, but I recognized it immediately. Ricardo had never needed formalities. He had what I wanted. I left through the side entrance of Nova Dynamics, keeping my movements quiet. Half an hour later, I was sitting in the dimly lit backroom of a cigar lounge, facing the man who could uncover the darkest corners of anyone's life. Ricardo slid a folder across the table without a word. Inside, neatly compiled evidence unraveled everything I thought I knew. Lena and Nolan had been involved for nearly a year. It had started quietly: late-night meetings at hotels, extended business trips that conveniently overlapped. But there was more.
Wire transfers.
Money moving from Lena's personal account into an offshore fund traced back to Nolan's firm. Confidential files. Key research from Nova Dynamics had been leaked at precisely the moments that had given Neurocore an advantage. This wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. She had been selling me out. The realization settled over me like a slow, creeping cold. I flipped through the pages methodically, scanning details that confirmed what I had suspected, but didn't want to believe. Nolan hadn't just taken my wife. He had used her to gain access to my company's most sensitive assets. Ricardo's voice broke the silence. The leaks coincided with Neurocore's most significant breakthroughs in the last 6 months. Information about our upcoming product launches, strategic investments. Lena had been feeding him everything. It explained the timing. Neurocore's sudden surge in market value. The aggressive takeover rumors. This had been in motion for months. I closed the folder and exhaled slowly. I should have seen it coming. Ricardo leaned back in his chair, studying me. He wanted to know the next move. Retaliation wasn't a question. It was an inevitability. I needed to secure my company first. If Nolan had access to what Lena had already given him, there was no telling what else he might have. My first call was to Daniel, my CFO and the only person I trusted implicitly. I met him in my office an hour later, keeping my tone level as I laid out the facts. Nova Dynamics had been compromised. The information was in the wrong hands. We had to act fast. Daniel's expression darkened as I explained the extent of Lena's involvement. He understood the stakes. We initiated a lockdown on all company files. Access restrictions were reinforced, outgoing data was monitored, and an internal audit was launched to track any further leaks. The damage had already been done, but I wouldn't let it continue. At the same time, I needed to play defense. If Nolan thought he had the upper hand, he needed to believe it for a little while longer. I instructed Daniel to begin moving key assets into separate holding companies. If Nolan was planning an aggressive takeover, he wouldn't be able to track where the real value was. By nightfall, another call came in. Ricardo had something else. Footage. Security cameras had captured Lena entering a luxury hotel 2 nights ago. She wasn't alone. Nolan had met her there. They were celebrating something. I played the clip on loop, studying every frame. The body language, the casual familiarity. She had chosen her side completely. Ricardo had left the most damning piece of evidence for last. A recorded conversation. Lena's voice came through the speaker, light, amused. She was confident. She told Nolan that once she finalized the divorce, she would have access to my shares. Half of everything. That was the plan. They would gut Nova Dynamics from the inside, slowly dismantling it while ensuring that Nolan's company absorbed the best parts. I let the recording play in silence. She had never intended to simply leave. She had planned to take me apart. Something settled in my chest. It wasn't rage. Not anymore. It was colder than that. This wasn't just about hurting me. This was a strategic move. Ricardo was waiting. He had seen reactions like this before, from men who had been blindsided, betrayed. He expected an emotional outburst. Instead, I exhaled, nodding once. We moved to the next phase. The next day, I met with a legal team specializing in corporate disputes. The best in the field, ruthless when necessary. The goal was simple. I wouldn't just protect what I built. I would dismantle every advantage Lena and Nolan thought they had. She thought she had secured half of everything. She had no idea that by the time I was done, she wouldn't even have a fraction. The moment I stepped into my office the next morning, everything was already in motion. The weight of what I had learned the night before didn't crush me. It sharpened me. Lena and Nolan thought they were in control, but they had underestimated the wrong man. Daniel had been working overnight, discreetly rerouting corporate assets into shell companies. The core patents, intellectual property rights, and liquid capital were already moving offshore, hidden behind layers of legal protections. By the time Nolan's team realized what was happening, there would be nothing left to take. But securing the company was just one piece of the puzzle. I wasn't just playing defense. Neurocore was riding high on a wave of stolen momentum. If Nolan believed he was winning, I needed to ensure that his confidence pushed him into a trap. The financial report release was scheduled for the end of the week. Officially, Nova Dynamics would be in a vulnerable position. Expenses would appear inflated. Projected earnings would be lower than expected. To anyone on the outside, it would look like we were struggling. A perfect opportunity for a hostile takeover. The real numbers, the ones that mattered, would stay buried for now. In the meantime, I had Ricardo digging into every possible weak point in Nolan's empire. Everyone had skeletons. I just needed to find his. By mid-afternoon, I had the first real breakthrough. Neurocore's recent market gains hadn't come solely from stolen Nova Dynamics data. Nolan had been leveraging insider information for months, placing trades based on confidential acquisitions before they were public knowledge. This wasn't just unethical. It was illegal. The SEC would be very interested in seeing what Ricardo had uncovered. But I wasn't ready to go public yet. Not until he had committed fully to the takeover attempt. Lena was still in play, still maneuvering, believing she had time. She thought the divorce would take months, giving her leverage to negotiate her way into my company. She had no idea what was coming. My legal team moved quickly. That afternoon, Lena was served with a petition that effectively stripped her of any claims to Nova Dynamics assets. The documents outlined fraud, conflict of interest, and corporate espionage, all backed by hard evidence. She had 30 days to respond, but she wouldn't get that long. That evening, I received a call from Daniel. Nolan was making his move. Overnight, His firm began acquiring Nova Dynamics stock in large quantities. It was subtle at first, but the pattern was obvious. He was positioning himself for a full-scale buyout. Exactly what I needed. I called Ricardo. It was time to tighten the noose. The next phase of the plan was about pressure. Nolan needed to feel untouchable, confident. If he sensed a trap, he would hesitate. That meant keeping the rumors circulating. Speculation about an internal shakeup at Nova Dynamics. Uncertainty about leadership changes. The financial media picked up the whispers quickly. By the next morning, analysts were already discussing whether Nova Dynamics could survive an aggressive acquisition. I watched from my office as the headlines rolled in. Neurocore poised for industry takeover? Nolan Carter expands market dominance as Nova Dynamics struggles. He had taken the bait. Lena, on the other hand, was unraveling. She had tried to call me 6 times since receiving the legal documents. I let every call go to voicemail. She was starting to panic. She sent a message. She wanted to meet. I agreed, but on my terms. We met in a quiet, upscale restaurant downtown. She arrived looking composed, but I could see the tension beneath the surface. This wasn't the confident woman from a few weeks ago. She started with empty pleasantries, small talk, forced smiles. She was stalling. I let her talk. She claimed she never wanted things to get ugly, that she wanted a fair settlement. I simply slid the folder across the table. Inside were the bank records, the hotel footage, the recorded conversation where she detailed her plan to help Nolan take over Nova Dynamics. Her fingers tensed as she flipped through the pages. Her face paled. She knew she had lost control. Her voice lowered, an edge of desperation creeping in. She wanted to negotiate. I leaned back, watching her carefully. She had no leverage. I told her she had 2 options. She could sign the settlement agreement, walk away with what little remained, and disappear. Or I could let the authorities see everything Ricardo had gathered. She didn't argue. The meeting ended with silence. She walked away without another word. I knew where she was going. Straight to Nolan. That was the next step. Nolan needed to believe he was still in control. He needed to double down. That night, I received the message I had been waiting for. Neurocore had doubled their stock acquisitions. Nolan was all in. Tomorrow we would close the trap. The moment had arrived. Nolan had overplayed his hand, and now it was time to take everything from him. I spent the morning watching the numbers, tracking each move as Neurocore pushed forward with their takeover bid. Their stock purchases had escalated overnight, and analysts were already discussing the inevitable shift in power. Nolan believed he had me cornered. He had no idea that every step he took had been orchestrated. By noon, Daniel entered my office, his face unreadable. "It's happening," he said. "He's officially launched the bid. Right on schedule." I sent the final confirmation to my legal team. Within minutes, our real financials were released to the public. The truth about Nova Dynamics stability, its hidden assets, and the actual progress of our neural chip project, all meticulously timed to dismantle Nolan's strategy. The response was immediate. The market reacted in shock. Investors who had been wary of Nova Dynamics now saw the strength beneath the surface. Our stock, instead of plummeting, began to climb. Meanwhile, Neurocore found itself in freefall. Then came the real blow. Ricardo had made sure that every piece of Nolan's insider trading and corporate espionage was sent to the SEC that morning. The press was already swarming when the news broke. Neurocore was under federal investigation. I watched from my office window as the chaos unfolded in real time. News anchors speculated about potential criminal charges. Stockholders panicked, dumping shares. Executives distanced themselves, issuing vague statements. Nolan had no way out. Then my phone buzzed. Lena. I let it ring. She had made her choice. An hour later, Daniel stepped in again. Neurocore's board is turning on him. Faster than expected. The board members, desperate to salvage what they could, had called an emergency meeting. Nolan had promised them control of Nova Dynamics, and now they were watching their own company crumble because of him. By mid-afternoon, an official announcement was made. Nolan Carter was stepping down as CEO of Neurocore. It was over, but I wasn't done. The moment the news hit, I made my final move. I authorized the acquisition of Neurocore's remaining valuable assets, the ones I had been watching for months. Their research teams, their intellectual property. Everything they had built using stolen data would now belong to me. I didn't just survive Nolan's attack. I erased him. That evening, I received a call from Ricardo. He had one last thing for me. He had tracked Lena's final moves, where she went after she realized Nolan was finished. She had emptied what remained of her accounts and booked a one-way flight overseas.
No goodbyes, no explanations.
She was running. It was fitting. I put my phone down and leaned back in my chair, exhaling. For the first time in weeks, the weight on my shoulders lifted. It was over. But as I stared out at the city skyline, I realized something. This wasn't just the end of a battle. It was the beginning of something new. For the first time in weeks, my phone wasn't vibrating with urgent calls. There were no emergency meetings, no legal battles, no threats lurking around the corner. The war was over. I had won. Neurocore was in ruins, its assets divided and absorbed by companies that had once feared its rise. Nolan Carter had vanished from the corporate world, his reputation shattered beyond repair. Lena had taken the coward's way out, a one-way flight overseas, leaving behind nothing but an empty bank account and a trail of failed ambitions. Yet, even as I sat in my office overlooking the city, a question lingered in the quiet. Was it enough? Winning had always been my instinct, my natural state. But what came after? What did life look like when the fight was over? The answer came that evening. A message from Abby. Dinner. Thai place on 5th. 7 p.m. I hesitated for a moment before typing back. Sounds perfect. The restaurant was small, the kind of place most people overlooked, but Abby had a way of finding hidden gems. She was already waiting when I arrived, casually leaning back in her chair, her fingers drumming against the table. When she saw me, she smiled. Not the fake, polite smile of business meetings or calculated social niceties. A real one. Didn't think you'd actually show up? She said as I sat down. I exhaled, feeling the tension still coiled in my muscles. Neither did I. The conversation started light, work, random stories, memories from years ago. Then, somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, she leaned in slightly, studying me. You did it, she said. You got everything back. I nodded, and lost a lot in the process. She tilted her head. Did you, though? I considered the question. For years, I had built my life around Nova Dynamics, believing that success was the only thing that mattered. Lena had been a part of that world, but looking back, I saw it clearly now. She had never been my partner, just someone who had stood beside me while waiting for a better offer. She had spent years pretending to be part of my world, but in the end, she had never understood it. Abby did. She didn't say much after that, but the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't strategizing, planning my next move, or preparing for another betrayal. I was just there. When the check came, she reached for it, but I slid it toward me. This one's on me. She smirked. Careful, Ryan. If you start acting like a decent person, I might start expecting it. I laughed. Genuinely laughed. The war was over. And for the first time, I wasn't just looking back at what I had lost. I was looking forward.